All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We are lucky enough to have Hannah Renfro here with us, and I'm going to share a little bit about her before we get started. So Miss Hannah Renfro is a dedicated youth case manager too at Davidson County Juvenile Court in Nashville, Tennessee, where she specializes in managing cases for children assigned to the Rule 207 docket. This docket focuses on children found incompetent by the court, and Ms. Renfro's role is instrumental in connecting these children and their families with essential wraparound services. She works directly with families to stabilize the child's environment while fostering long-term success. Grounded in her belief that success is unique to every individual, Ms. Renfro empowers families to define and pursue their own path to achievement, guiding them towards meaningful, personalized solutions. As a Nashville native, Ms. Renfro earned her Bachelor of Science in Political Science, pre-law from Middle Tennessee State University. Outside of her professional work, she enjoys training dogs, playing the violin, and cherishing quality time with family and friends. So in a nutshell, she's wonderful. We're very lucky to have her here. And I should have said that I'm Sarah Glasscock, and I'm the Director of Advocacy at CASA Nashville. And we have some staff members here as well. I don't know if you guys want to say hello.
Hello, glad to be here.
Sarah Camp, and our newest staff member.
Hi.
This is
Hi,
Dinora
this is
Guzman
Crystal.
Cruz, and we're very fortunate to have her joining us this week. It's her second day. So I will hand it over to Miss Hannah. We'll do a more proper introduction for Dinora another day.
Awesome. And Miss Edwards is my supervisor. She will hopefully be joining us shortly. I think she may be in the waiting room. She just texted me. Is she in there?
See. Hmm. Let's see. I wish I could admit all instead of doing this individually.
I just admitted all, I think.
Okay. Great.
Sarah, I'll try to keep an eye on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is Miss Billy with us? Can you hear us, Miss Billy? Did she say yes?
I have not. I'm waiting for her to respond.
Let's see. I see her as a participant, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce
There
her
she is.
in case
Yes.
she speaks. Oh, there's Miss Billy. Hello. All right, I'm
Hello.
going to give your wonderful intro too, because these are great intros. Miss Billy Edwards currently serves as the Metropolitan Nashville Davidson County Juvenile Court as a Youth Case Manager 3, supervising the court's newest program, Strengthening Families. And she was previously employed by the state of Tennessee Department of Children's Services and has over 20 years of work experience with children and families. Miss Edwards believes in the philosophy of there, but by the grace of God go I, and this sentiment heavily influences her work ethic and interaction with the community. Miss Edwards was born and raised in the city of Chattanooga and then transitioned to Nashville to further her education at TSU. And she holds a master's degree from Cumberland University in Public Service Management and a bachelor's in criminal justice from TSU. And in her spare time, she enjoys reading, writing, spending quality time with family and friends. And I'm in a leadership program with her, and she's hilarious if you ever get to hang out with her. All right. Again, I'll hand this over to Hannah again.
Thank you. So Miss Edwards and I will just kind of run through what we do with 207, what we're working to achieve with our program, and then at the end, if y'all have any questions or if there's anything that we needed to kind of go more in depth on, we'd be happy to do that. So kind of starting out, our purpose is what drives this program. So it's a specialized program designed to empower our youth and their families through tailored support and services. So from the time that we've started, our goal really is to keep our kids at home, stabilize them in our community, and make sure that they have the tools that they need to be successful at home, and not just kind of relying on the family to navigate everything by themselves. So coming to us, there's two main pathways that kids go through our system. So once they've been faced with an allegation for a delinquent charge, they can go the first route, So if there's a concern that there may be any kind of competency question, that JCCO can be ordered. And then from there, a full psych evaluation is done through Vanderbilt Center of Excellence. And then if they are found competent, then they would proceed with the normal adjudication process, meaning that their case would go through the normal settlement process. They could be determined to need probation, whatever that looks like for that young person. The other option is if those same competency questions are raised, the JCCO is ordered, that full psych determines that they're incompetent, then they automatically come to what we at juvenile court call our Rule 207 docket. So that docket is specifically for youth that are found incompetent. There's a 2 o'clock docket, which is for those youth that are incompetent that are in the Department of Children's Services custody. And then there's our 3 o'clock docket, which is for our 207 kids that are in their homes or with family. So basically the kids that are in the community. So with those two, if they are found incompetent, whether they're in custody or at home, they can't be adjudicated, so they're not able to be under rules of probation, pretrial diversions, any of those supervision levels that youth may typically go through. So our goal on our 207 docket is to case manage them, work with them, provide them a lot of the similar supports that they would get. It's just not a probation officer in the home. Again, there's no rules of probation, and it's a lot more centered around their buy-in and focused on them just kind of being successful with the parent. So when we talk about key players, we're going to talk about our court staff, our case management staff, and then our service providers. So when we're looking at court, consistency is a huge thing for these kids. It helps to make them feel more comfortable. It helps them to be more open, and it helps and for them to also kind of understand the process and navigate. So Magistrate O'Neill is our 207 magistrate. He does all of their reviews. Excuse me. Excuse me. Sorry. Stacy Miller. Goodness. Okay. Stacy Miller is our ADA, so she is going to be the same assistant district attorney that is there for the reviews. So she's not so much there in a like to be a prosecutor for those cases as much as to just be a voice for the state. TJ Jones is our GAL. So if she has a conflict, we do have other attorneys that will pull in for that, but we try to keep our GALs consistent as well because that gives us one attorney that knows how our docket runs, kind of is familiar with the services needs for our kids, and can kind of help navigate those a little easier. For case management staff, Billy Edwards is our supervisor for our strengthening family team. She's amazing. She provides support to the docket as a whole, to everyone. And then I case manage those cases. So doing all of the kind of behind the scenes stuff and all of that, and making sure that we're providing what we can for our kids. Service providers is something that we've recently been trying to really grow for this population. So we know that they have specific mental health needs. A lot of them have a lot of educational support that they need. Workforce development is something that we also try to make sure they have, because we recognize that, a more traditional educational route may not be what they are interested in or what they feel successful at. We lie heavily with CASA. We work with y'all a lot on these cases. DCS provides non-custodial support sometimes. So if we're needing access to additional services, if we're needing more in-home eyes on the family, those kinds of services we can request for a non-custodial. And then additional support. So any providers that might be able to help with mentorship or peer coaching, whatever that looks like, to again stabilize the family, support the family. That's our main goal. We know that we are in their lives hopefully for a temporary amount of time, so we want to make sure that we're helping them and helping them empower themselves to not need us and know what support network is out there for them so that they can navigate that. So specifically for the case manager's role with 207. So when the kids come, we're researching their history. So we want to see what kind of court contact they've had, what may have been successful, what's not been successful, just what kind of trauma history do they have with the court system. We also utilize our CANS 2.0 assessment to kind of figure out what their risks and needs are. And then we really case plan specifically around identified needs for each child. So we're not checking boxes, we're not doing, they have to have something that fits in each category. It's specific to each kid. And then we're making those necessary referrals to make sure that the families have the support to get everything set up. That also feeds into our building that support team around the family. We want them to know if it's a Saturday night and they have an emergency, but it's not necessarily maybe a 911 emergency, who can they reach out to? Who can they be supported by? And then we definitely want to keep a very strong collaboration with our family and our teams to make sure that everyone knows what's going on. We're all on the same page. Sometimes there will be concerns that maybe they're sharing with one person. So, how do we navigate that in a way that we're making sure that family feels supported, but we're also not making them feel like we're maybe sharing too much personal information, and making sure they understand what is personal and what do we have to report out on. So, three big things. So, a surprising amount of our kids come to us with no IEPs, or their IEPs are out of date, or the accommodations are out of date. So, education is huge. We want to make sure that this population has every possible access to a fair education. And we want to also recognize what they want to do with their education. So, some of the kids definitely want to do, you know, whether it's community college or some kind of college. So, we want to make sure that their diploma pathway is something that they're able to achieve, but it's also not going to hinder them in what they want to do after school. Their mental health is another big piece. So, a lot of times with their trauma histories, and if they do have any kind of cognitive functioning, their mental health can kind of make it a little much more of a gray area. And so then you have kids that are presenting as defiant when really it's just an avoidance behavior. And so, really wanting to make sure that we have mental health providers that understand this population, are willing to be extra patient with these kids, and be, big collaborators with us to make sure that what we can do as their team to support them in their work, that everybody's working together. And again, support is key. I can't say it enough. This population really needs support, and they really need people that are going to be consistent, because a lot of times they've not had that. Their behaviors are being viewed as behaviors instead of mental health or trauma. Their behaviors are not being viewed as, educational concerns. It's they've just kind of been labeled. And so we want to really peel back that label, let that kid shine as who they are, and support them in maintaining that. So when we look at our 4 areas, we're definitely having that initial contact. We want to make sure that that's a face-to-face contact, that is a huge moment for them to kind of understand why we're here, understand what's going on, ask questions, and we wanted to follow up, because at court, they're not going to be, as forthcoming about everything. They may not even be able to kind of concentrate on everything that they want to express. So that initial contact is kind of a two-piece. We want to make sure that we're having it at court, that it's meaningful, but then we also want to follow up to make sure that they're having that opportunity to kind of explain things that they may have not had a chance to. So they have monthly court reviews. They're the last Wednesday of every month. If they're doing well, O'Neill will kind of put some space between it so that we can give them time to kind of do things without us, and we can make sure it's all working and in place. So they are available monthly. They'll be set as needed. And then if we ever need to add them in, maybe things are kind of escalating and we feel like it would be best, we can always do that as well. So I do my best to be in regular communication with the families. Depending on the family and the child, that can be weekly, that can be every other day, that can be every other month, or monthly. It just depends on what that family needs. We want them to be successful without us. So typically, as they're doing better, we kind of space that communication out so that they are able to kind of utilize that network that doesn't involve the system, so that we can make sure that we're stepping out and they're fully supported. Again, it's different for every family. I have a mom that calls me almost daily, and that's just what works. And then I have another mom that I might hear from her once a month. Usually it's because I've reached out to her, but things are going really well. So, like, this is not on the forefront of her mind, and that's great too. So, it's kind of different. Like with probation, there's not like a set number, or there's not a risk of them being in trouble if they miss a phone call. We want to make sure that we're a help and not a hindrance. So case planning looks a little different for this population as well. So there's three main kind of areas in the case planning that we really kind of look at. So you're looking at the youth. So we want to look at individual things for them, mental health, school, everything that's just specific for them. But we also have kids that have complex trauma, complex mental health, complex needs. So we also want to make sure that we're not forgetting that that parent is living with that child 24/7. So they may be calling and everything may seem like an emergency, but that may be how the family is feeling. It may be that everything is a crisis unless it's good. And so we have to be able to kind of figure out how we're going to navigate that. And again, make sure that we have those supports. If it's 10 o'clock on a Saturday, is there a peer coach? Is there some programming where that mom can pick up the phone and call that person instead of having to call the police? Can we kind of figure out a way to network? We want to reduce not only the recidivism, but the overall police contact, because we know the more police contact we can reduce, that's obviously going to reduce our recidivism, but that's also going to make our family feel more stable and more confident at home dealing with those behaviors. So when we think of out of home, 207 population cannot be placed into DCS custody, juvenile justice, which is great. We know that they're going in NND, so that kind of changes the way that the department should place them. So they can still be placed in level 3, but it would be more of like a residential setting. We also have the option, if the child is escalating and the child is willing, or we think that we can get the child to be on board, we can pursue residential without a DCS case, and do that through that process. It's a little trickier. However, residential DCS and ND is always our last resort. We want to make sure that there's not anything more intensive that we can implement in the home, that there's no more additional support networking that we can develop, because we know that once they go into residential, even if it's a great residential program, it's still traumatic. They're still being taken out of the home, and we want to do everything we can to reduce their overall trauma. So when we think about data collection, we do have general data that we collect. We also track their JCCOs. So JCCOs can't be released through a normal release process. So we're making sure we know which providers are asking for them, who's getting it, and we have a cover letter that we're using so that we can make sure that we're able to show that we're doing everything to protect that child's privacy. And then on top of that, we want to make sure that those that need it have access to it. So it's a full psych evaluation that looks at all their mental health, their trauma history, everything that would be beneficial. So it can also be beneficial in developing their treatment plan for their mental health services. So we want to make sure that those who need it have it. But we also want to make sure, for instance, that it's not falling in the hands of a school that's then going to maybe have access to inappropriate information that they shouldn't have access to. Psych evaluations are extremely personal. And so we just want to make sure that we're protecting our kids and our families. So we also are tracking our referrals, all of those kinds of things. And I wanted to make sure, Ms. Edwards, is there anything that I've missed or anything that you would like to add?
I do want to add how important it is. Hannah said it spot on, but I just want to reiterate how important the communication piece is. But it's also important for families and our partners to know that we're not permanent. It's not our intention to be permanent, but it is our intention to promote that our families have a certain internal sense of empowerment where they can advocate for themselves, where they can become self-reliant um, on other community partners or family members or family friends as well, that can be a positive support for them. We don't want them to become dependent on us as a system. We want them to feel empowered, to be able to do more for themselves than we have done for them. And so that's just really important, because once we kind of sort of start to lay off communication, as she suggested, we want mom or dad or aunt or grandmother or whomever to be comfortable going to the school and saying, hey, I have this concern. Let's sit down and discuss it. So we also want to engage in that manner where folks are empowered to advocate for themselves, so they'll know they don't need Miss Edwards for that. They don't need Miss Hannah for that. They can do it themselves. And that gives us a sense of pride that we've done our job. We're like happy parents on the other end of that thing. Like, yeah, Miss Jones, you go get it. You know what to do. You know what to say. So that's really important for the work as well. So we wanted to make sure that we shared that portion with you.
It's definitely one of the biggest pieces. And so it's just something that we talk about a lot, and we try and figure out how we can better build it, better support it. So yeah, so I'd like to open it up and see what questions you all may have. See if there's anything that y'all are wanting to kind of hear more about.
Yeah, if folks just want to pipe up and unmute with your questions, and if you're more of a chat box question asker, I'll moderate that. Whoever wants to pipe up.
Yeah. Hannah
Yes.
and Miss Edwards, this is Jess Ingram. You mentioned the word defiant and trying to reframe that, and I think sometimes that is a quote unquote diagnosis that gets put on a lot of children. And I know in cases I've had to like go in and try to get a
Oh, we lost you, Jess.
okay.
You're back.
I just wondered if, and you and I recently talked about this on a case, like if you can just talk about like the strategy for trying to get more appropriate diagnoses for our kids so that they can get better mental health services and even better understanding of where they're coming from, as opposed to just the ODD diagnosis. I
Yeah.
think that could be helpful because the first time I encountered that, it didn't. It's now something I know to look for, but it's really a helpful thing, I think.
Yeah, and so avoidance is huge. A lot of our kids, especially that have high anxiety or PTSD, avoidance is a really easy coping mechanism. It's really easy to protect yourself if you just don't let anybody get close enough to see it. And so something that we've really struggled with this population is that we have kids that mask as, kids that they are around. So they look and act and talk like their peers. And so, they're really good at masking cognitive and mental health needs. And so, something that is slowly starting to become more readily available is cognitive behavioral therapy, we've all heard of. But there's trauma informed cognitive behavioral therapy that really looks at it through a trauma informed lens that kind of guides the work a lot differently. And the benefit to that for this population is that avoidance is kind of one of the things that they're looking for, and they kind of use as a need for this specific type of therapy. Um, Getting diagnosis changed is a hard thing to do. Something that we've recently heard from Center of Excellence, especially with kids that are diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder, is requesting a separate anxiety screener to be done to see if maybe that anxiety screener might flag something that could potentially feed into the ODD diagnosis. And that's kind of been our way to cushion the ODD diagnosis in a way. And then that kind of also will again change the way the treatment plan is designed. So it's definitely ODD is a popular diagnosis. I think all of us that work in this field know that there are different diagnoses over the years that tend to trend. And I feel like ODD is definitely one that's trending right now. And so I, our kids may meet all of that diagnostic criteria, but if you can ask specifically, have they had an anxiety screener? Do they have PTS diagnostic? That tends to be a way of kind of reframing it and getting a little more success in finding services that are not just traditional cognitive behavioral therapy.
Is there a preferred vendor or provider that provides those anxiety screens?
So most providers, to my knowledge, if they're able to diagnose, then they would be able to. It might be something that you could talk to if they have medication management services, or it might be something specifically that that provider would have to refer out for. But they should be able to tell you, like, we don't diagnose, but we can set this up. It just kind of depends. This young person, Center of Excellence, was able to ask because they were at an assessment center. And so I think to access it outside of that scenario, it would come down to talking to their current provider about where we need to get them signed up specifically for that assessment. I've not had to do it yet, but I would assume if you're thinking of like Tennessee Voices, Centerstone Health Connect, all of those, if they're not able to do it themselves, they should have a person they can connect you to.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Sorry, I'm echoing. Hannah, for the non-custodial cases, do they all have an FSS? And if so, are there certain caseworkers that tend to do the 207 kiddos, or is it just varied?
It just varies. So any non-custodial 207, they'll have an FSW, and I'll let Miss Edwards speak more on that. She's way more knowledgeable about the department. And to my knowledge, there is no like specific person.
Yeah, she's absolutely right. In her answer, Ms. Renfro is, we would love for the department to kind of have a catering group, kind of like we do for our 207 population, but unfortunately, we don't have any control over how they choose to assign the cases that they receive. But we do our best to help educate our colleagues that work in different organizations from us. And so we hope to continue to build a relationship and help those FSWs become more familiar with our population. And maybe that'll spark the idea that maybe they should do that. But if not, we're doing our best to share information with them about the population, and then specifically about what we have going on internally with the team that we have currently, from the magistrate down to the guardian ad litem.
I'm
Thank you.
wondering, yeah, I'm wondering if we can take it back a little bit and kind of dig into that word incompetent. If you all can share a little bit more, because it's a big word.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so it's a lot different. A lot of people, when they hear incompetent, they think of insanity pleas, because we've all watched a lot of court TV and true crime. It is not nearly the same thing. So the threshold is a lot smaller or a lot less for juveniles. So competency truly just comes down to, do they understand the process? So just because they are found incompetent and they are found to not understand the process does not mean that they have an insanity plea or they were unable to appreciate what happened or any of those things. It is just as simply as, were they able to understand the process? And so that also means that we get kids that have no intellectual or learning disabilities, or on paper, they may have, more like ADHD, ODD. Now, that's rare. A lot of our kids do have that complex trauma. I would argue that all of our kids that we come in contact with have complex trauma. And so on paper, of course, they're going to have those diagnoses and all of those things to back it up. But at the end of the day, all it means is that they weren't able to understand the process. So they didn't know who the judge was, or they weren't able to decipher their attorney from the other people involved, or they weren't able to understand the roles of everyone involved. And so that's where their JCCO comes into play. That's that full psych evaluation. And at the end of that recommendation, or at the end of that psych evaluation, they do make recommendations. So we do our best to make sure that we're taking that into account when we're doing their case plan. Obviously, there's some things that we're just not able to accommodate, but we do our best to get as close to it as possible. And in most cases, we're able to implement those recommendations. So incompetency, if they're under 12, is pretty much a guaranteed thing. Obviously, that's not a absolute, things can change or be different, but for the most part, if they're 12 or under, they're going to automatically be incompetent. And then we have a fabulous court here that has a fabulous vision for our community. So if a child is found incompetent, our district attorney accepts that from that expert in their field, and we don't have a full competency evaluation. Now, that doesn't mean it could never happen. Again, it's just that's our usual way we do things. So our DA accepts that evaluation for what it is, and then they're automatically put on our 207 docket, and we go from there.
Thank you.
I have a question. And maybe this is something I should just talk to the CASA team about, but I'll ask anyway. It sounds like a very comprehensive program. Is there a different way in which a CASA volunteer would interact with a child in this program? Different from what I'll call a quote unquote regular case?
Yeah.
If that
So
makes-
I would say yes and no. In my opinion, they do require, you want to have strong boundaries with them. I mean, they are great kids to work with. Some of them do struggle with attachment, though they don't always have the most healthy attachment styles. So, having those boundaries is definitely important for them. But the biggest thing, and I think this kind of would be important for all of our kids across the board, is you want to make sure if you're telling them, I'm going to come on a Tuesday, that you show up on a Tuesday. Specifically for the 207 kids, it could be something as simple as you say you're going to come at 10 and you get there at 10:30. That can actually have an issue towards their trust, their rapport building, all of those things. A lot of my kids see things very black and white. And if you tell them you're coming at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, if you're not there at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, then you just kind of fall into the group of people that have said they're going to do things and then they don't do them. And so then it's kind of, you spend more time kind of rebuilding. And that's not necessarily been my experience with all of the kids I've worked with, but specifically with this population, most of them tend to be very, very black and white. Like it's just kind of in their nature. And that also goes for they're going to appear or talk to you and act like they understand everything you're saying. And you're going to be like, oh, like but if you ask them to repeat it back, a lot of times they can't. Or the way they repeat it back is not the way you intended it or the way you felt like you gave them that information, but the way they receive it is very different. So I would always suggest, especially when you're working with them, kind of talk to them and see. So I just explained all this. Can you explain it back to me and then let's talk about it? Because a lot of times they will do what they have to get out of the conversation. But if they realize that you're taking the time to break it down and kind of make sure they understand, then it kind of lets them be a little more comfortable asking those questions and letting you be one of their safer people. That then translates to sitting next to them in an IEP meeting and they're like, hey, I really don't understand this. Because they don't feel comfortable saying that in the meeting, but they'll feel comfortable saying it to you. So I feel like that's super helpful. And part of that communication piece that Miss Edwards and I keep talking about is really kind of putting in a little extra work with them to build that communication rapport, because it'll translate into so many other things that they are dealing with in their day-to-day life that they're not going to be forthcoming of either way or otherwise.
And it's important to be genuine, like Ms. Renfro just
Mhm.
said. It's important to be genuine. And the balance of your genuineness and creating those healthy boundaries can be a little tricky. So for example, if you know that the goal is that you're not going to be permanent as a CASA worker, you know that you're here temporarily. In order to get the parent of that young person and that young person to understand that, for an example, if they have to call 10 care about something, but they don't want to do it, they want you to do it, then the alternative that I would suggest in that scenario is I'll come by the house Thursday morning at 10:30. We'll do the call together. But in that moment, you have to understand that Ms. Jones needs to do the majority of the talking, and you're going to have to coach her into doing that. but also Travis, who's the young person, for example. If Tin Care has a question for him, you got to empower him to answer it. You're just there to be the bridge to create that level of comfortability for them, because it is foreign. They've never done that before, or they've never felt comfortable just dialing the number. You're there to be that bridge for them, that grounding surface for them to be comfortable to do it. And then one day that they're going to do it and you're not going to be there, they're going to call you and tell you how good the call went or how good the therapy session went. So that's what we would like for you all to kind of figure out, how to balance that, how to help them balance that as well as you, because we're not meant to be permanent. That's not the goal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just added to the chat as well that these cases are considered starfish cases at CASA, and that stands for Supporting Teens at Risk and Families in Need of Hope, Support and Hope. And we ask for weekly contact versus monthly. And they're typically shorter cases. If there will be 6 months if they complete their probation successfully. That doesn't always happen, but that's the hope. And that weekly contact could be not necessarily in person, but it could be a phone call, spending some time with them at court. Yeah, so it's a little more interaction than we
Yeah.
ask on a standard CASA case.
And just to reiterate again, any cases that you get that are coming from Hannah, those young people are not on probation. That means if you get a call from someone else, one of our other colleagues, and they're telling you that young person is on probation, then they are not a part of the 207 program. They are completing what we would deem to be a regular standard supervised probation case. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Thank you for making that distinction.
Mhm.
And so that also so they won't necessarily be 6 months. They can be, we usually aim for a year. So our
Really?
207, yes. So our 207 kids, we aim for a year just because we want to have time to get services in place. We want to have time to problem solve those services. And then we want to have time to slowly kind of pull ourselves out so that we can make sure that those supports that we're trying to put in place are doing what they're supposed to. And then for our older kids, we also want to make sure that we have some kind of plan for once they turn 18.
Okay, thank you for making that correction. So a 207 would in likelihood be a year, but a standard starfish case could potentially be 6 months.
In theory, yes. But sometimes
Everything
our
goes
young
well.
people, yeah, they can reoffend, and that probation episode can be extended as well. And I know you all may be thinking, a year is a long time, and it is, but oftentimes in the life of these cases, it can feel like 6 months. But that is the goal for 207 is a year. But sometimes our standard supervised probation cases can go on longer than 6 months. That just depends on the young person's behavior and their progress. So in theory, yes.
Yeah, I see your
Yeah.
hand, Jess. Just real quick though, and I'm going to use air quotes, a standard CASA case. So that's a youth that doesn't necessarily have those charges. I think the last time we ran the numbers is lasting an average of like 2.5 years, almost 3 years. So in theory, this could be a closer or shorter case in theory. And Jess, you can go ahead.
Thanks. I just wondered, Ms. Edwards and Hannah, could you talk a little bit about disability? Am I still talking? Sorry, I'm actually getting a call from
Yeah,
my
no, you're good.
placement on the other line. Can you talk a little bit about disability and how y'all kind of think about assessing for that, like intellectual
So-
disability,
Gotcha. Okay.
things like that, how it affects how you proceed on a case and what services you look for? I've come on some cases where that had not been considered yet, and we all kind of realized later how that screening could have been helpful earlier, and then I've come on some where that's already been done. And actually, I'm finding that I've had a few 207 cases where disability was a part of it, intellectual disability. So just wonder if you could talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit.
So intellectual disabilities are tricky because schools are technically tasked with identifying kids that need assistance to have a fair and equal education. We all know that that's what they're tasked with, and that's not always how it works. So school should be able to, if you have any kind of suspicions that they're needing an IEP and they don't have one, needing a 504 and don't have one, you can always request that process. Now, they get really weird about doing it if it's right before a break because they have a 60-day window to complete that initial, so they'll do
Right.
everything they can to push it off. So the school should technically do the actual testing and assessments that would lead to them being able to say that there is a learning disability. Intellectual disabilities are going to be a little more tricky to get those diagnoses. It would be more trying to focus on getting. Now, the psych evaluation will have some of that testing or will have access to some of that testing that's already been done. A lot of kids that have more severe intellectual disabilities have usually been on the radar somewhere and maybe just fallen off. And so it, is really kind of trying to access those records and make sure that their current IEP reflects what their needs are and that we're not just taking last year's IEP and copying and pasting it into this new IEP and saying the accommodations need to stay the same. So you can always push back on that. If you feel like they are, for instance, one of the schools had an IEP for one of my kids and they said that he had low reading comprehension. And so they were providing some accommodations, but then it turned out the child couldn't read. And they had read him the questions to do the assessment. And so it really took the team saying, okay, obviously that's not acceptable. You're not doing a proper assessment. You need to do a proper assessment. And then the accommodations need to be based off of the accurate assessment. So you can definitely pull in those meetings. The way I usually do it is I'll talk to the mom, express my concerns, get mom on board and say, hey, let me email the school with you CC'd on it and kind of take lead on that to take some off your plate. And then let's work together in the meeting. So before the meeting, I'll meet with the parent and say, this is my concern. This is what we need to ask for. And then I'll encourage that parent to be the voice in the meeting saying, you say that he can have the verbal score, but how does he have a verbal score if he's never actually done the assessment? And then I'll back up as a professional saying, yes, these are things that I'm seeing as well. CASA can, everybody can kind of rally around the family to say, look, like we all see it. And that's been successful. You can also work with, if they have any kind of intellectual disability anywhere down the line with their IEP, you have access to transitional, it's SOS transitions. And they can kind of help step in with educational advocacy and with some of those transitional services, especially as they're starting to get closer to 18. And then you also can ask for educational advocacy. The Public Defender's Office offers it. Vanderbilt Center of Excellence offers it. There are several different outlets that we can plug into to get it. But sometimes having an educational advocate, especially if it's an educational advocate attorney on the case, they will do assessments more thoroughly, or they will do some of those assessments that you feel like maybe are needed that are not being done. When it comes to actually getting SSI and those things, that obviously is a process that you just kind of have to walk them through, helping them get the accounts, documentation, all of those things set up. Something to keep in mind too is if your kid gets SSI and they go in and indeed the department takes that SSI. So if that kid's on a trial home visit, now you have a parent with a kid in their home that may or may not depend on that SSI check to help take care of the child that they're not getting. And so you want to make sure that if you have a kid stepping down out of care, you're kind of planning for that. The family knows that's going to happen. And you can also help that family navigate making sure that they get that back in a timely manner. Because usually if the kid transitions in the middle of the month, they may still not get that next month's check. And so it's been a tricky situation for a lot of my kids and their families. DIDS offers some services. The services that they offer have been harder to get for this population because they have severe and complex needs, but not severe and complex enough necessarily to qualify for some of the stuff out there. So really kind of trying to build a strong advocacy team would be my biggest recommendation, so that you have other professionals that work specifically in that area that can kind of help you help the family navigate and empower for those assessments. Um, so the school can and should do them, but it may take pulling some other people to the table to really be the loudest voice in the room on that.
Thank you, Hannah. And just anecdotally, if this is helpful for other volunteers, but I had a couple things recently on some testing at a residential facility where thankfully the tester pulled some of us aside later in email and was like, he just wasn't speaking to me the first half of the test. He was like, so the score is
Yeah,
really low. I was like, well, that
yeah,
makes sense. He'd never met you
yeah,
before. Like he started warming up to me at like an hour in. So I think the score is low. Recommend you retest. I was so glad he said that to
yes,
us because we were a little
yeah,
surprised by the score too. So just keeping that in mind. And then the other thing that came up recently in an IEP meeting that struck me as strange, and a couple of us, and so we spoke up, but the safety plan was like that they were basing the kind of enrollment plan on. We were like, what is that safety plan? Like this behavior, we didn't even know what they were talking about. And then finally I was like, wait, when is that from? And they had paperwork from 2019. So, you know, it's like
yeah. It's
to be like, can you show me that documentation just to make sure you know? I was like, yeah, that we need to update that. That is not reflective of the child in 2025. So just if that's
absolutely,
helpful
yeah.
for their volunteers.
And if you have mental health providers, so if there's a therapist, or even if that therapist has like a support team, if there's anyone from the child's um, mental health team that can come to IEPs, I've always found that to be really, really helpful, because sometimes you'll be in an IEP meeting and the school is at their end with the kid, they're frustrated with the behaviors, and they're ready to just get rid of that kid. But then you have that therapist that can kind of break down the behaviors and why the behaviors are happening and what they're doing to try and support the kid through the behaviors, and be intricate in what they're going to do to maybe work with the team. Like maybe that therapist or that mental health provider is able to like join some kind of, phone tree. Like if the kid's having a behavior, call me, I'll do this. And sometimes that can too help with those reentry meetings, especially to kind of give the school, which they shouldn't need, but give the school a peace of mind that that kid is worth taking a chance on. Again, the kids shouldn't have to prove themselves, but in a lot of situations, that's just the position that we're in. So anybody that you can bring that can kind of provide that, like, this is what we're doing, sometimes will help keep the schools um, a little happier. So yeah, manifestation meetings, reentry meetings, anything like that. If you can pull in a therapist or a counselor that's able to do it, um, 9 times out of 10, your overall result from the school will be more positive, just because they feel like you're doing more because it's someone else saying that they're doing what you've already said they're doing. But it can be helpful. So always keep that in mind too. The more people, the more supports that you can pull, and especially in those initial meetings, sometimes it can make a difference going forward.
Thank you.
And here's the deal. I don't want you all to think that the school is going to be happy with you. You're going to push their buttons, but this is a part of your advocacy. So don't be afraid to hold them accountable, because they're going to hold you accountable for what it is you're supposed to do, just like they hold us accountable for what we're supposed to do as representatives of the court. So don't be afraid of that little pushback that you're going to get on the front end. And I think you all know what that is. It may be some eye rolling or some heavy sighs. Go ahead and take that on the chin, but still advocate for that young person, still push that parent and empower that parent to advocate for that child, so we can look at this IEP, because it could be copied and pasted from 3 years ago. This young person has grown, whether they've regressed or progressed. Either way, we need to reassess and figure out what needs to be on this current plan, and how we can continue to help this young person be successful. So don't be afraid of that pushback. They give you a little attitude. It's okay. Just respectfully push them, to do what they're supposed to do, because you need to do what you have to do. And if there's a refusal not to, Hannah knows I say this all the time, there's always another option. And that, is available as well. So don't be afraid of that pushback that you may or may not get from the school. Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
These are great questions. Does anybody have any other questions?
I actually have one more, but I won't ask it. I'll wait and see.
So maybe a question to ask yourself, are you ready to take on a second case, volunteers? Does this sound like the type of case you would like to take? We can talk about that. And I know our new volunteers are on here and they're saying, give me a case, and that will happen soon.
Mhm.
All right, Jess, if you want to go ahead.
So one thing I've been trying to do more is kind of mentor my kids in how to advocate for themselves. And I
Mhm.
wonder if you guys have any good stories or things that you've done that have really helped kids know when and how to advocate for themselves in these situations.
So I think it's hard because if you tell a kid to speak up for themselves, sometimes the things that they want to say are not necessarily the things that they should say. So something that I try to do with this population and with all the kids that I've worked with is if you feel like it's something you could get in trouble for saying, tell me, tell your mom, tell an adult on your team, and then let us do it because they can't suspend us. If you have something that you're upset about, that you're frustrated about, they can't suspend me. And I might be able to say it in a way that gets us a better result, but I want you to be in the conversation. So if you're upset about, for instance, there was a teacher that was messing with one of my kids. Okay, don't cuss the teacher out. Don't try to handle that yourself because they may or may not say something that upsets you. They can't suspend me. They can't suspend your mom. Let us request a meeting with the school so that we can have a conversation with that teacher with you to try and figure out. And then again, it's all comes down to meeting ahead of time and meeting after. So I'm going to meet with that kid the day before the meeting. This is what I think is going to happen. I think the teacher's going to say that it didn't happen that way. So when
Mhm.
they say that, instead of getting mad, I need you to just kind of take a breath and
Mhm.
making sure that your kid has coping strategies in mind ahead of time. So if the teacher makes you mad, then you need to ask, hey, can I step out? Or hey, can I talk to my mom? Whatever that looks like. And kind of have a plan for if things don't go well. And that way, that kid knows that there's an exit strategy. But a lot of times, kind of helping them do that gives you the chance to model the behavior and then they
Mhm.
can mirror it. So if they see you getting a meeting set up and then in the meeting you're calm and collected and saying, hey, this is how you made my kid feel because they feel this way, I just wanted to have this conversation so that hopefully we can all kind of get it out there and figure it out. And then you let the kid kind of take the reins. You're giving them like a positive pathway for that conversation. You're there to support them. And then that child is kind of having that accountability and that responsibility. And that tends to be an ideal way to handle it. And sometimes it might be, if they're having issues with a certain teacher or they're having issues with mom, just taking the time to hear that kid out and then helping them process it with you gives them a calmer demeanor to go into that conversation, whether you're there or not. And just kind of explaining to them, like, it's not that you can't say something, it's that we have to make sure that the way we say it is respectful of others, but we're also, it's just little things. Or like, I love the way you're excited about this and that you're ready to talk about it, but I need you to make sure that you're using a quieter voice when you do it, because when you get excited, sometimes you get a little louder and that could come off, just kind of problem solving with them anything that you may see as something that would make the conversation negative or tricky. and then letting them do it. And then a lot of times too, having the conversation after, did you feel good about that meeting? Do you feel like it was helpful? Do you not feel like it was helpful? Would you want to try something different later? Like just kind of putting on your coaching hat of like what you would want to do, how they want to do it, and letting them kind of lead it. Again, they're gonna say things that they shouldn't. They're gonna say it in a way they shouldn't. That's part of it, and that's where you can kind of step in and say, "Hey, I think this is, we need to step back," or, they let's take a second, and just kind of being there to interject, because the truth is a lot of our parents have never had that support either. So they don't know how to help their kid have that conversation. They don't feel comfortable reaching out to the school and saying, "Hey, this teacher's picking on my kid," because as soon as the principal says, "Well, you're lying," that's a trigger for mom, and now mom is yelling, and so now the school thinks both the parent and the child are a problem. So it's really kind of trying to problem solve ahead of time for that conversation, giving space for that conversation, and then really having that after conversation of, "This is how we could have done it differently," or, "You did great," just anything like that. And don't be afraid to tell the school, "I need a meeting where everything is positive." Like, every time you call this mom, it's negative. Everything you say to this kid is negative. I need a meeting of 10 minutes where everything is just positive. Because at the end of the day, you're temporary. You want them to have a good rapport with their school. And sometimes it's going to take you building that for them, because the school's not going to necessarily, do it on their own either. I don't know if that answers that at all.
Yeah, that is such a great idea. Thank you so much.
Okay.
That is wonderful. I love that. And I just want to be mindful of time. And I think that's probably a really great way to end on a positive note. Any last thoughts from either one of you all?
Thank y'all so
say-
much. Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
No, you're welcome. I would say just do what your name says. Advocate. Advocate, create healthy boundaries between you and your families, and know that your stay is temporary. Not that you need to rush them or push them into areas they're unfamiliar with, but just keep that always in the back of your mind. I'm a court-appointed special advocate. My stay here is temporary. Let me help this family build what they can build while I'm with them for that short time, even though a year is a long time. Or however long you all stay, I'm not sure, so I want to speak for your program, but however long you all stay, just keep that in the forefront of your mind. Continue to be genuine. Continue to know that some of the things that these families have never experienced before, like the example I gave about calling TennCare about insurance, that's something that we do for ourselves more frequently. It's something they've never done before, and they genuinely don't know how to do it. So just continue to have that thought and that expectation that this may not be their experience. That's why they look like a deer in headlights. So just continue to have that mindset of service, genuineness, and just remember to advocate. That's the top 3 I can think of right now on the spot. But we appreciate you all and the work that you do. We're always excited to have you on cases with us. So just know that we're here to work with you to help all of these kids and families be successful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Hannah and Billy, and thank you for all the work that you do. You guys are incredible. And thanks for everybody for attending. Don't forget to please record 1 hour of continuing education in Optima. Have to do my job, have to say that. So thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Oh, volunteers. We have our volunteer appreciation lunch today, and our RSVPs are low. Please let us feed you. We're going to have tzatziki's. Hannah and Billy, you're welcome to come. But it's going to be really wonderful. But we need to know how many people we're going to feed. So please do RSVP. I'll be resending that link to my folks soon. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy your day.
All right. Bye.